On the way out of Jericho, a blind man named Bartimaeus sat begging on the roadside. The Gospel of Mark tells us Jesus is passing by, and Bartimaeus cries out for him to have pity. Jesus stops and asks him what he wants Jesus to do for him. "Master, I want to see," he says. Jesus replies, "Go your way, your faith has saved you." And he received his sight and then followed Jesus. You can see with your eyes, yes, but you can also see with your mind, heart, and spirit. In this episode of Faithful, we meet a Catholic priest who is blind, whose journey to helping others see the way to God has not always been easy.
Here is the blunt truth, and I'm not trying to put the church in a negative light. I'm just stating a fact. The church hasn't always been good at dealing with people who are quote-unquote different. It's difficult.
I'm your host, Tony Ganzer. Thanks for joining me for the Faithful podcast, and a special welcome to new subscribers and supporters. Today's episode is a real treat. Come with me as we meet Father Jamie Dennis on this episode of Faithful.
I walked from the caboose over to my train.
Father Jamie Dennis spent a recent evening talking with me from his family farm near Owensboro, Kentucky, the chorus of Gray Treefrogs singing loudly. This is where Father Jamie stays, in an old train caboose, and has his own working train, which runs on track he laid himself.
Giving you the heads up, here's the horn.
All right. That a man would have his own train and caboose might pique your interest already. But the fact Father Jamie is blind and a Catholic priest might add another layer to the intrigue.
My neighbors are probably thinking, oh no, he's running it this late at night.
Yeah, right. This is a podcast about faith, but trains are such a big part of Father Jamie's life, it seems appropriate to explain a little more. He says he's loved trains since he was a baby.
I visited the Kentucky Railway Museum for the first time when I was in kindergarten. And so there's a railroad crossing in my hometown of Caneyville. My parents would take me there to watch the trains go through. I got to know some of the engineers by being at the railroad tracks and being at the museum.
Father Jamie could still see when he was younger, though his vision progressively worsened with a condition called retinitis pigmentosa. The rods and cones in the back of the eye start to die, creating an ever-narrowing tunnel vision.
When I was in 6th grade, I commented to one of my engineer friends, "Oh, I hate seeing cabooses being scrapped. If I could, I'd rescue one and live in one." And so he talked to his boss, and I'm standing on its porch at the moment.
My goodness, wow.
So in 1998, that's when I was in 7th grade, we got the caboose home. So when it arrived, it had no windows, no doors. The paint was peeling off, and it wasn't very happy looking.
By the time Father Jamie graduated from high school in 2004, the restoration work began, and he was living in it after his first year at college. The restoration continues, though, with help of his local Knights of Columbus Council, which will repaint the caboose for the first time since the 70s.
It is in much need. It's very rusty on the outside. It needs some attention. So they're going to do that for me, and we're going to hopefully restore it to its first original paint scheme, because it originally was Illinois Central.
Okay.
And so I'm hoping to replicate that and put it on the historic registry.
If that isn't enough to prove his dedication to rail, Father Jamie also runs his own railroad, kind of.
I also own my own narrow gauge railroad that I drive and operate. So I've got almost 1.5 miles of track.
Wow.
And it runs around our farm, and we have 150 acres. So the railroad traverses the bottom half of the farm and I run it totally myself. You know, you don't have to have a steering wheel because it sits on a track.
Right, yeah.
And so I run it. I know every bump in my track. My dad and we built it ourselves.
Wow. Oh, goodness.
And I can say that I myself laid about a half a mile of that track by myself.
Wow.
And did it totally by feel.
Mm.
And because by the time we were building the second edition of it, I was already well into most of my vision loss.
Half of his family farm is fields, he says, and there's also a lake created by merging ponds, so Father Jamie can take a pontoon boat around that lake.
Beautiful day for boat ride.
There are also various shrines to St. Anthony or St. Kateri or Our Lady of Guadalupe or St. Michael the Archangel, and every good rail operator needs a station, so there's also a building for an incredible model train setup.
I actually found a little figurine of a priest in a cassock and surplice and stole, which is what I wear for evening prayer. So I tell people, I'm on the layout. Just look for me. You'll see me.
And the other half of the building is for gathering together,
where I can give retreats, banquets, and I have an altar set up in there so I can celebrate Mass there. So it's basically what a train station is for. It's to gather people, to take them places. And of course, in this case, not necessarily a physical place, but a spiritual place.
Mm-hmm. Father Jamie's train station includes space for two important aspects of his life, the trains and his faith. And it's a blending you also see on his YouTube channel. You get train content where he shows off the models, just as you get his thoughts on various issues, or you can join him in prayer. Father Jamie says his journey to the priesthood began at home. He couldn't see most of what happened while at Mass, but the words of the consecration of the Eucharist stuck with him. That's the point when Catholics believe bread and wine are transformed to the body and blood of Christ. Father Jamie says his farm animals would be his congregation when he played Mass as a child. Before undertaking the formal path to the priesthood, though, Father Jamie faced a rough road of being a young person who was losing his vision.
When I was in kindergarten, I didn't always color within the lines. I was a little slower than the other kids, and they thought that I had astigmatism. So I was wearing glasses, which at that time, a kindergartner wearing glasses was a rarity.
Right.
I started learning how to read Braille in 4th grade, and I actually took some short courses for a couple of weeks at a time at the Kentucky School for the Blind, which I hated.
What did you hate about it?
Well, I was a country boy in the middle of the city of Louisville.
Okay.
That was strike one.
Yeah.
Second of all, they told me that that's where I needed to be. Meaning the school was saying that. And, you know, my classmates at home didn't think of me as all that different because they had grown up with me.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the sad thing was my parents were being told you can't raise him right and he needs to be in Louisville. And so my county school system, because I went to public school, the head of the special education department, she was on board with that. She got the teachers with her, the school counselor, and the principal. And the way she did that, she had a meeting and she said, look, would you send your 7 or 8 year old child away to live somewhere during the week away from you? They got it. And the other thing that Mom and my teachers did was they got the media involved. There was a news story on our local TV station that took this up. And, you know, so we kind of
mobilized.
We kind of shamed the special ed director and the school superintendent. And, you know, my teacher was interviewed and she made it very clear there's no reason why he can't be here. And according to the Americans with Disabilities Act, it makes it clear that, you know, we have a right, just like anybody else, to an education. So this is where I get a little controversial.
Okay, I'm ready.
I label schools for the blind as segregation. And, I mean, basically that's what it was. you can't handle your children. They need to be in a different place, separated from everyone else. And that's some blind people that went through the schools for the blind get a little uncomfortable when I say things like that. And I've had some arguments, but I tell people, I say, there's no reason why we can't be at home in our regular schools, thanks to the technology we have today. There's absolutely no reason. And all the money that is spent on dorms and all this stuff, it could be used at home.
Mm-hmm.
And the best thing of all, we get to be with our families.
Right, yeah.
And the second best thing of all is that our presence in the school system means other children see this as normal and don't look at us as different. And then the third piece of that is if we're in a regular school system and not just with blind children, then we already know how to deal with sighted people in the real world.
Mm-hmm. Father Jamie eventually wanted to work for a railroad, big surprise, I know, and went to Brescia University, a Catholic university in Owensboro. He hadn't been confirmed in the Catholic Church yet, but decided he would go to Mass every day to learn about his faith. He eventually changed his major from business to ministry, but still didn't embrace the idea of being a priest, despite a professor mentioning it. After a cousin died of cancer, Father Jamie's family asked him to speak at the end of a funeral mass, and he sought advice from his college president, who mentioned he and the bishop had talked about Father Jamie maybe going to seminary, which he eventually did. And then came new challenges, like finding texts and religious materials in Braille. Fortunately, an organization in New York called the Xavier Society for the Blind works to provide materials just like that, free of charge.
Here is just the blunt truth, and I'm not trying to put the church in a negative light. I'm just stating a fact. The church hasn't always been good at dealing with people who are quote-unquote different. It's difficult. I mean, I was the first blind person to go to my seminary, and at first they did not want to accept me. I've been kind of a trailblazer in my own journey, but for so many people don't know how to self-advocate and, things like that. And so that's why the Xavier Society is so important, because sometimes the church just doesn't know any better, in a sense, doesn't know, oh, we should make this accessible for people because of this, and this.
Yeah.
And to give you an example, when we were trying to get the Liturgy of the Hours in Braille, the company that we had to assist with that, at that time we were in a difficult place anyway because our bishop had just retired. So when we contacted the English and the Liturgy people in Washington, D.C., and we said we need the permission to do this, they thought we were trying to make money off of it.
Oh.
And it took a year to finally get the permission to have it brailled. And it was because, it just hadn't been done. They didn't understand what we were trying to do. And the focus was on the on the money, It's sad, but that's what happened.
In the last episode, we heard more about Father Jamie's connection to the Xavier Society and how he had to get the Liturgy of the Hours in Braille. These are the psalms prayed in a 4-week cycle around which a priest's day is supposed to revolve. And I encourage you to check out that episode for more about Father Jamie's challenge in getting basic texts in Braille. He figures there are only about 10 blind priests in the U.S., and most are not parish priests like he is at Blessed Mother Parish in Owensboro. Most priests who are blind are members of religious orders, he says, and it wasn't until the Second Vatican Council that blindness was no longer an obstacle to somebody pursuing the priesthood. Now, the law of the Church, canon law, affords a blind priest to be assisted if needed. Otherwise, carry on. Father Jamie says the Xavier Society has opened up new connections for him with people considering to follow in his footsteps.
The Xavier Society helps get me connected to other blind priests. They've helped potential seminarians get connected with me and other blind priests who are discerning priesthood themselves.
That's interesting.
So it's a beautiful thing. And there's actually one guy that he's about to start his third year of seminary. He's from the Diocese of Orange in California. And he and I met through the Xavier Society. And I helped get him into seminary because he started out in the Archdiocese of Los Angeles. Their seminary did not accept him, so he got accepted in the Diocese of Orange, and he's been doing just fine. It's funny, it was when he started seminary, he called me a couple of weeks into it, and he said, "Father, what is this whole adoration thing about?" And so I told him, I said, "Okay, you know Jesus is present in the Eucharist?" He said, "Yes." I said, "Well, during adoration, they place the consecrated host in a vessel called a monstrance for the sighted people to look at." And I told him, I said, "You and I, since we cannot see the host, we have to let Jesus look at us." So that's how we experience adoration. So it's a different world for us.
Absolutely. Yeah.
But, thanks to the Xavier Society, that conversation was able to happen.
Just a quick tangent. You've spent so much time, Father. I really appreciate this. This has been great.
Oh, no problem.
I did notice in your train video, I think you were wearing a Byzantine cross. And you had mentioned that you do have an affinity for the traditional Latin Mass, the Tridentine Mass.
I do.
And I wonder if it's up to a society like the Xavier Society to give you access to maybe some of the more traditional documents or to tie you into even different rites. I wonder how you experience that, how you can access that.
So, yes, they are helping with that because I asked for a missal because before Vatican II, say if a priest lost his sight, he would be able to pray the votive Mass for the dead, which was the shortest Mass, because he could memorize it.
Right.
And so just for the fun of it, I asked if they could braille the votive Mass for the dead from the Tridentine Mass. Mm-hmm. And so they did. So yes, they're able to do those things. And also, I love the Byzantine Church. I got to experience that in seminary. My rector of my seminary is by ritual in the Melkite Church.
Okay.
I have in Braille, thanks to the Xavier Society, the basics for Vespers in the Byzantine tradition. And so I know how to do most of that. But the beautiful thing is the way the book is set up for their Vespers, it gives me the rubric. So it tells me when to bow, when to cross myself, when to bow to which icon, and things like that. And I have some Byzantine icons that are tactile, so you can feel the icons.
Yeah. Maybe I'm just projecting, but it seems like it would be much more complicated for you to experience both the Tridentine Mass, but also the Byzantine Rite, because there are so many movements and directions, and it's just different from the normal go on Sunday Mass.
Yeah, and the main thing, the Byzantine liturgy is actually very accessible to a blind person because you repeat so many prayers over and over again.
Yeah, okay.
To be honest, I'll just be blunt. The Novus Ordo Mass is a little less accessible because we don't chant as much in most parishes.
I'll just jump in to say the Novus Ordo Mass means the new order or ordinary form of the Mass, as in the way Catholic Masses have largely been celebrated since the 1960s. This is contrasted with the extraordinary form or traditional Latin Mass.
We're using hymns, and different parishes use different hymns. And I'm not going to carry a 5-volume Braille hymnal with me.
Right.
It ain't going to happen. It ain't going to happen. I am very traditional, and that's part of it, is because traditional forms of Catholicism are more accessible because there's a lot of repetition. Chant is easier than hymns for me. And so a lot of times I will chant the Liturgy of the Hours, even if I'm by myself. That's one of the things I love about the seminary I went to at St. Meinrad. Father Columba Kelly, a monk of St. Meinrad, composed in English psalm tones in the style of Gregorian chant, but they're in English.
Wow.
And so I don't have to be able to read music to chant the office and to do the mass parts. And I chant a lot of the mass because, especially when it comes to Braille, I can pray the prayers easier because singing, doing the chant, gives me a rhythm, which gives me a little more comfort because my brain is having to translate dots into speech.
Right, yeah.
And so the rhythm of the chant makes it flow better as opposed to just reciting it.
Huh.
So a lot of people, when they see me for the first time, and they're like, "Oh, he's a trad." And it's like, no, this is how I can do it.
Yeah.
A little easier.
So is that the
And,
primary reason that you have more an affinity to the Tridentine is because it is
That's part of it.
accessible? Okay, yeah.
That is part of it. The traditional ways are more accessible. Same with the Byzantine liturgy. And the other thing is, we blind people have to have structure. You mess with our structure and our routine, we're lost.
Yeah.
And so those of us who are blind, I've discovered through being at the St. Lucy Mass with the Xavier Society, when I chant, they're right there with me. I have in some ways more participation from them than I do in some of the parishes I've been to, because I chant the Sanctus in Latin, and it just blew me away the first time I was at the St. Lucy Mass. I thought, I'm just going to do this. And I did, and they were with me.
They joined you. Wow.
Sanctus, Sanctus, Sanctus Dominus Deus Sabaoth, pleni sucedi et terra, gloria tua.
It was beautiful, and I kid you not, more participation, and I think it's because they, like me, the traditions are our routine, our structure, foundation that gives us comfort. And one of the reasons I also like the Byzantine liturgy is because there is so much of a focus on the unseen realm.
Mm-hmm.
And the incense going constantly, those are sense-stimulating things.
Yeah.
And, the incenser in the Byzantine liturgy has bells on it. You have all these different things, which in the Tridentine Mass too, the use of the bells.
Right. Yeah.
And, lots of things like that.
The last thing I want to ask is there anything else you want to say? Is there anything else you want people to know?
Being a blind priest is possible. I can do anything that any sighted priest can do, except I can't drive a car. They said, we question your usefulness to your diocese because you're in a rural diocese. And, that means a lot of driving and things like that. I have volunteer drivers. All of my drivers are volunteer. They're parishioners. A lot of them are retired. And a lot of these people feel like they can't do anything else for their parish, but they can drive a car. And they've learned that through assisting me, driving me, there's a lot of other things they can do too.
Yeah.
And I will say, if there's anyone out there a young man who's thinking of seminary, regardless of whether you're blind or not, don't be afraid, just try. And it's a difficult world we live in, but it can be dealt with.
With God's grace, indeed.
Yes.
This has been amazing, Father. Thank you so much for sharing so much.
You're more than welcome, Tony. God bless you. And, if you need anything else, just let me know.
Thank you for joining me for this episode with Father Jamie Dennis. I really hope you enjoyed hearing about him and maybe found something new to consider about the Catholic faith or about the experience of a blind man or maybe trains. We really covered the gamut. I want to leave you with something I found while preparing this episode. Faith for Christians is a treasure, recognizing the truth beyond us, the eternal love of God, which lights a more meaningful path forward. Pope Francis wrote in his encyclical Lumen Fidei that faith's understanding is born when we receive the immense love of God, which transforms us inwardly and enables us to see with new eyes. Thanks again for listening, and please, have a great day.